I'm here with Michael Burlingame, affiliate faculty of the Center for Lincoln Studies, editor of the Center for Lincoln Studies book series, and the Naomi B. Lynn Distinguished Chair in Lincoln Studies at UIS. He had already written 20 books, written or edited 20 books about Abraham Lincoln, but that wasn't enough for Michael. So he decided he needed to put out the complete edition of Lincoln the Citizen in the Center for Lincoln Studies book series. The original version, originally published by Henry Clay Whitney, and Michael has added to that. And thank you for joining me today, Michael.
Thank you for having me.
Let's just get started out and try to describe to folks who might not know who Henry Clay Whitney is, and what when was the book originally published? What period of life of Lincoln's life does it cover?
Well, Henry Clay Whitney was a lawyer in Illinois, in Urbana, and he participated in what was known as the Eighth Judicial Circuit, to which Lincoln belonged. And that was lawyers in central Illinois in the spring and in the fall would go from one county seat to the next and argue cases on behalf of the local residents. And then they'd move on to the next town and the next town and the next town. And that was a great way for lawyers to get to know each other. And Whitney was 22 years younger than Lincoln. He had been born in Maine in 1831, and his father moved out to Urbana. He moved with him. He'd gone to college a little bit in Ohio, and a little bit in Kentucky, and then studied law in a lawyer's office. And so he joined the circuit, and Lincoln took to him, and he took to Lincoln. And Lincoln, and he comments in his book about how Lincoln attracted young lawyers, and they were drawn to him, and he was very helpful and solicitous, and it represented a part of Lincoln's character that Whitney illuminates, as that is the kind of paternal quality that Lincoln had, which was part and parcel of his larger personality. It's been speculated by psychologists, particularly Carl Jung, that we were each dominated by an archetypal figure. And in Lincoln's case, that seems to fit in his kind of wise paternal father, that he radiated that. He didn't go out of his way to try to manufacture it. It was just part of his nature. And young lawyers and young children and people in general were drawn to him as though he were a kind of father. And so when he was president and known as Father Abraham, that wasn't an affectation or a PR person's invention. That was part of his nature. And Whitney's book helps bring that out. And the book was published posthumously. That is to say, Henry Clay Whitney died in 1905. The book doesn't appear until 1907. And unfortunately, it was edited, that is, cut by someone who was not a Lincoln person, and threw out a lot of good material. And when I was doing research for my big biography of Lincoln many years ago, I was just going all around the country. One of the advantages I had trying to do a cradle to grave biography is that I didn't have to focus on one aspect of the story. I just looked at everything. And so if you do that, you get all kinds of information that you might not have discovered. Say, if you were just focusing on his lawyer, you might not look at some other person's papers, which contained information. In any event, so I'm at Harrogate, Tennessee, which is in Appalachia, Lincoln Memorial University. And the Lincoln Memorial University was established after Lincoln's assassination to honor his memory in a region that is Eastern Tennessee, which was populated largely by pro-Union people, mountain folk, who resisted the slavocracy of the central and western parts of Tennessee and were badly persecuted. And Lincoln, throughout his presidency, was constantly trying to get unions, and it's very difficult to get into that mountainous region and carry out campaigns. But Lincoln was constantly urging that be done. And this was a way to honor his memory and his service in that department. In any event, so they have some good material there, some good original source material. And one of the things I was surprised to find was a manuscript version, that is a handwritten version of the biography that he had written, the first volume of which was called Lincoln the Citizen, which just deals with Lincoln up to the day he was inaugurated president. And then there was a second volume, Lincoln the President. But the first volume is much more valuable because it's based on what Whitney saw. Because 5 months of the year, Lincoln would be out on the circuit, half in the fall, half in the spring, and he would socialize with the lawyers. So they would be arguing against each other or on the same team with each other. But then afterwards, they would socialize and they would tell stories and reminisce and interact in ways that created a real bond. And so if you want to understand Lincoln, the best thing, of course, is to read his works and then my book, of course. But the best way to get at him is reminiscences by people who really got to know him well, and the people who got to really know him well, aside from his wife, were his law partners, his partners on the circuit. Mm-hmm. Now Lincoln's law partner of longest standing was William Herndon, and from 1844 to 61. But he didn't go on the circuit very much. Lincoln got to see him regularly when he was in town, of course, and Herndon's biography of Lincoln is invaluable, much more so than Whitney's. But Whitney's is a good supplement to it because these guys really did get to know him, not just as lawyers, but as friends, because they would talk about things other than the law.
I want to get into that relationship a little bit more in a second, but sure. So there's a lot to unpack there. First, I love that story of unionism in Tennessee, right? And we could have a whole conversation about how Lincoln's constantly frustrated, trying to think about Reconstruction during the war and how these unionists are going to be part of it. But what's you're in Tennessee, you find this new material. What's your reaction?
Oh, well, I've already read the printed version of the book. I see this handwritten document and I say, whoa, there's a lot of stuff in here that doesn't show up in the printed version. And so I used a fair amount of that material in my big book. And then my instinct, I made a note in the back of my mind to say, as soon as I get the big book done, I'll issue a scholarly version of the original manuscript with footnotes and introduction and all that. And as part of it's a kind of instinct I have, which I think dates back to my freshman year in college, when I was I took a Civil War course with a very eminent Civil War scholar and Lincolnian, David Herbert Donald, and I took this course with him and got to know him because we had small class discussion groups, and I got to meet with him once a week to discuss a book that he had assigned along with some other students, and got to know him pretty well. And he was very kind to me and made me his research assistant, which was very flattering for a 19-year-old college sophomore. and he had just won the Pulitzer Prize for the first volume of a biography of an important senator during the Civil War, Charles Sumner. And here I was, 19-year-old pimply kid, and here I am helping him do research for the second volume of his Pulitzer Prize-winning, his biography of Sumner. And so I have in some ways, I'm still a 19-year-old research assistant. But my clients are now, my clients now are everybody who wants to write about Lincoln or know about Lincoln. And I just have the kind of knack. I can't account for it, but I keep stumbling across new information about Lincoln, like this handwritten document.
If you can teach that knack, you can. I'm sure there's a lot of students who'd like to learn.
Well, it's just I don't know. It's like a I have this like a witcher's device to find water. I just walk into a library and all of a sudden I just stumbled across these things. In any event, and so that was years ago, and so I finally got around to doing it. And it's a lot of work. There's a fair amount of drudgery involved in this sort of thing. The discovery is one thing, then getting it ready for press, annotating it, identifying all the characters who are mentioned in the episodes that are discussed and so on, and also all the literary quotes. He's rather immodest about flaunting his education.
If I had to read one more reference to ancient Rome, I might have lost.
Right, exactly. Exactly. But it's so much handier than, and you might say, well, we can get stuff like this now is online, or their images, or, but that's not, first of all, it's bad handwriting. and, and second, there's some stuff that needs to be pointed out is just not accurate.
Oh yeah.
uh,
Oh,
and so,
um, yeah. So I want to get into some of the inaccuracies too, because that's so writing books generally can be a very solitary venture, or if you have a co-author, really intensely collaborative. But you have a sort of weird co-authorship here with Henry Clay Whitney, who's been dead since 1905. Did it feel like you were co-authoring across time, or maybe editing someone's work who couldn't talk back to you, which is probably the best way to edit someone's work? And then how did you go about? I mean, there are portions in here where you just footnote all of this is incorrect, essentially, about especially Lincoln's early life. Yeah.
Right. And so, I think it's a dialogue with the reader. I have really a saying. This book contains a lot of valuable information that you won't get anyplace else. That is, here is somebody analyzing and describing Lincoln's actions and his character, who was really intimate with him 5 months a year for 7 really important years, 1854 to 1861. Those are the years when Lincoln emerged and practiced as a champion of the anti-slavery movement in Illinois, and indeed in the nation. And there were other members of the circuit, but they didn't leave books that are as informative and as revealing of the character and actions as Whitney. So you have to take the bitter with the sweet here. So some stuff here is really not trustworthy, but others are trustworthy, and those are the ones that I emphasize. I try to let the reader know ahead of time in the introduction, and then in footnotes that this treat this with some skepticism, but this is the real McCoy.
Yeah. You mentioned a little bit Lincoln's sort of mentorship, maybe, or fatherly approach to some of the young lawyers. Whitney was one of these. Herndon, maybe the most famous example of this. And you touched on this a little bit, but sort of what makes Lincoln's relationship with Herndon different than his relationship with Whitney?
Well, Herndon was involved with Lincoln for a much longer period. 1844, they hook up. That is, Lincoln hires him as a junior partner, and then he sees him practically every day when Lincoln's in town, and most of the year he's in Springfield. Now he's away 4 or 5 months of the year, but that leaves 7 or 8 months of the year where he is in Springfield, and he goes to the office, and he likes to spend a lot of time at the office. His domestic life was a little stormy, and so he usually looked for reasons to be at the office or at the state library or whatever. And
that's a whole other conversation too, right?
Right. We can touch on that later if we want to, but so they got to know each other quite well, and he actually tells Herndon some stuff that is really quite remarkable. But then he tells things like that to Whitney too, not as intimate, but he does also do that with Orville Browning, but that's another story. So there's a tiny handful of people that he was really intimate enough with: Herndon, Whitney, Orville Browning. These are all lawyers and political activists in Central Illinois that he spent a lot of time with, and he felt as though he could open up to. And the kinds of revelations that we get in this book are more about his early life. One of the things that I found particularly valuable about this book, and the reason that I was eager to get it out into the hands of future scholars, and it's of interest to scholars, and it's also to general readers, because it's a great character sketch. It's a relatively brief book. I mean, it's thick because I have a lot of footnotes, but it has a wonderful character sketch of Lincoln and his appearance and his character and his being, and And not just in the courtroom, but among his friends when he's relaxed and letting his hair down and telling dirty stories and that sort of thing. And so anyhow, but as a scholar, I was eager to get this book done to tell other scholars, hey, look, Whitney tells us, and there's reason to believe him, that Lincoln would divulge a lot of information about his early life. Well, Lincoln growing up in Kentucky and Indiana, and then early years in Illinois. And Lincoln in general is very shut-mouthed about his early life. He doesn't talk about it when he's asked to write an autobiographical sketch. It's pretty brief. Well, there are two of them actually, and they're both fairly brief. And when his biographer or campaign biographer asks him about his early life, he says, Feld, Jesse Feld, there's nothing really to write about. It's just short and simple annals of the poor, as Thomas Gray put it in his Elegy on a Country Churchyard. But of course, there's a lot more to it than that. And I'm a psychohistorian. That's one word, by the way, not two. And so I'm very interested in the early life and then how that affects the later life and how, for example, why does he hate slavery? Well, I argue that it's partly because his father treated him like a slave and he identified unconsciously with slaves. But that sort of thing is particularly interesting to know. I didn't find anyway the early life of any person of substance that you're interested in understanding more fully, and so. So here's Whitney. Now Whitney doesn't tell you, oh, and this day he told me about his mother, and that day he told me about his father, and that day he told me about Anne Rutledge. Now you do get that sort of thing with Herndon and his informants, which is to be desired. So that the kind of gold that is in Herndon's biography and in the massive collection of interviews and correspondence that Herndon had with people who knew Lincoln is truly invaluable. That's the mother lode, but this is also a vein of high grade ore too in the same general area, and but you'll find things here in this book about Lincoln's early life that aren't footnoted, but seem to be what he was told by Lincoln. And so I thought, well, this ought to be available to scholars. And one of the things too about the book and to do book versions of these primary source materials is a subject index, because that really makes them valuable. Because it's one thing to have a document available online, and even if the handwriting is good or it's typed or whatever, a good subject index, and it's very important to get when you do this kind of work to make sure you have a good indexer. And that's one of the things that we're trying to do with the University of Illinois Center for Lincoln Studies. I don't mean to trample on your, turf, to explain what we're up to, but it's to try to continue publishing original source materials with good transcriptions, reliable annotations, and a particularly reliable indexes. So,
and this book it's really clear. The notes are great, but also it's really clear what the original material is and what has been added from what you found, and that's very helpful. So you don't have to go comparing editions. I will say that Jesse Feld biography is convenient just because it's the only Lincoln biography I know that you can frame and put on your wall. Some are 2 volumes long. But so it's very useful for scholars. If you had to crystallize what a general reader might get from Whitney in maybe a sentence, what Lincoln might come out of Lincoln the Citizen?
But how he triumphed over a very troubled and sad and difficult upbringing and early adulthood. That it's a cliche to think of Lincoln as somebody who triumphed over adversity, but the adversity that Lincoln did suffer, which he doesn't talk much about, at least to Herndon or to people in general, but he does to Whitney, and Whitney has a very fine analysis and description of Lincoln's early life and the forces that shaped him, and how he overcame a great deal of very hard challenges. And he's very good about painting that background and emphasizing that aspect of Lincoln's biographical trajectory.
Wonderful. Michael, thank you for sitting down and talking with me. The book is Lincoln the Citizen, the complete edition from University of Illinois Press. Always lovely to talk to you, Michael. Until
My
next
pleasure,
time.
Jake. Thank you so much.